Hello everyone, and welcome once again to Caleb Likes Books. Today I am bringing you yet another Star Wars Legends book review, and that is for Planet of Twilight by Barbara Hambly. Now this is the third book in the Callista trilogy, which I believe is an unofficial trilogy, but it's a sequence of 3 books. The first book was written by Barbara Hambly as well, called Children of the Jedi. The second book was Darksaber by Kevin J. Anderson, and then this is the third book. I have reviews for those first 2 books on my channel, so you can go check those out if you'd like. My general brief thoughts on those 2 books. Children of the Jedi, I didn't dislike necessarily, but I found it almost entirely forgettable. There was nothing really about it that stood out to me. The second book, Darksaber, I actually quite enjoyed. It had a lot of characters in it that I liked from the Jedi Academy trilogy, because Kevin Anderson also wrote those, so he brought in a lot of those characters. And that was generally an enjoyable book for me. I liked that one quite a bit. So that brings us to this one, the third book in the sequence, and unfortunately this one for me was much more like Planet of Twilight than Darksaber. I would say I like this one a tiny bit more, but really most of my thoughts are basically the same. So because my thoughts largely are kind of the same, this is probably going to be a fairly short review, because I frankly just don't have much to say about this book, kind of similar to Children of the Jedi. As far as positives, I do enjoy kind of the setup of this book. Before reading this book, I read the blurb on the back, which I do occasionally. I don't always read the blurb, but sometimes I do. And I thought, hey, that sounds like an interesting premise. So at the very least, it's got an interesting premise. And I also enjoyed some of the character interactions here and there, some of the point of view chapters, things of that nature. In particular, I really enjoyed the C-3PO chapters in this book. C-3PO is a character who I love a lot, partially because he's just a great character, also because if I were in the Star Wars universe, I would imagine I would be quite a lot like C-3PO. We share a lot of similar traits. But I really enjoyed his chapters in this book because there are actually several that take place from his point of view. And I thought that his chapters were just delightful. I loved them. They were so fun and funny and all these things. But unfortunately, those were really the only chapters that I thought were that engaging. The other chapters weren't like terrible by any means, but like his chapters were the only ones that I found memorable in pretty much any way. Otherwise, none of it really did much for me. So now, already moving into the negatives, like I said, this will probably be a pretty short one. So this one, for me, kind of similar to Planet of Twilight, is just not a very memorable book. There was some interesting plot setup and things like that, some interesting stuff going on, but none of it was very memorable to me. None of it really kept me engaged. This was one of those books where I was just kind of reading it just to get it over with. Not that I have an issue with not finishing books. You know, if you read books and you decide you're not going to finish it, that's totally up to you. Personally, I haven't not finished books, really, as of right now. And especially in the case of Star Wars Legends, I want to read all of it eventually, so even if it's a book that I'm not loving, I'm still going to read it because I want to read all of them eventually, in their entirety. So I just this was one of those books where I was just reading it just so I could get through it, because none of it really was that interesting to me. It just didn't grab me that much. And again, not all of this book was like boring or uninteresting or whatever. The C-3PO chapters, like I said, I enjoyed. There were some character interactions. There's a conversation that Leia has with Callista towards the end of the book, for example, that I thought was particularly memorable, particularly interesting. But other than that stuff, this one just didn't do much for me. And I'm wondering if, because this also happened with Barbara Hambly's other book, Children of the Jedi, I'm wondering if it's maybe just the way she writes, if it's her writing style, if it's her way of putting books together, her way of plotting, I don't know. I'm thinking that it could just be a thing with this author, because in general, I've just not loved the way these books are put together, partially, I think, due to the presence of flashbacks in these books, which all 3 of the Callista books have flashbacks, but I personally felt that they were better telegraphed and better handled in Kevin Anderson's book Darksaber. And I think that's part of the reason why I didn't love it and why none of it really did much for me, is just things like that with the writing style. Just for some reason didn't do it for me. The whole flashbacks thing, I did find it a little bit more manageable this time around because I by this point knew how she wrote, but I don't think it really did the book any favors. And just, yeah, in general, not much to say about this one in most ways. It's just a very middle of the road, not really bad. I can't point out anything that I didn't really like about this book aside from the writing style, really. And there's nothing really that I loved except for those, like the 3PO chapters, which, just gonna say, as far as a rating out of 10, I'd give this a 6 out of 10. If you've seen my Children of the Jedi review, you may know I gave that a 5. The one reason, and one reason alone, that I am giving this a slightly higher score than that book is because I love the 3PO chapters. And that, for me, is enough to bump it up that tiny little bit. But otherwise, for me, a 5 or a 6 or whatever is very middle of the road. Like, it's not really great, it's not really bad, it's just completely in the middle. And so for me, those 3PO chapters kind of saved it from being quite a 5, but not very much more than that. So that's pretty much really all I've got to say about this one, just not a whole lot. So that's pretty much all I got for you for this review. Let me know down in the comments if you have read this book and what you thought of it, if you had a similar experience to myself, or perhaps you really enjoyed this one. I've heard from some people this is their least favorite EU book ever written, which is not the case for me, but I could see it, considering that even some of the EU books that I don't particularly like have some memorable stuff to them, whereas this just really didn't for the most part. So I can kind of see that, but let me know down in the comments what you think of it if you've read it. And that's pretty much all I got for you today. So thank you all for watching, and I will see you guys next time.